The electron transport chain is a series of protein complexes embedded in the mitochondria membrane. Electrons from NADH and FADH squared are transferred through these complexes. Involved in this process are hydrogen ions, NADH and its 2 electrons, FADH squared and its 2 electrons, molecular oxygen combined with 2 hydrogen to make H2O. 10 NADH and 2 FADH squared made in glycolysis in Krebs make their way to the electron transport chain. 1 NADH transfers its electrons to the first protein complex. NADH dehydrogenase, coupled with this transfer, is the pumping of electrons to the outer membrane space. The 2 electrons are then transferred to the Q complex, a mobile transfer molecule that moves electrons to cytochrome B-C1 complex. As each of these electrons is passed onto the cytochrome C, another mobile transfer molecule, a proton, again is pulled through the complex into the outer membrane space. At our third protein complex, 2 hydrogens are pulled through the outer membrane space. Before we move on to our next step, we must become familiar with the story of FADH squared. Because FADH squared's electrons have slightly lower energy, they are transferred at complex Q and follow the same path as NADH's electrons. Part where I was going through FADH,
it's like 248.
Right? Yeah. I was going through FADH. Chemiosmosis involves the movement of protons down the proton gradient. After the gradient is established by ETC, protons move down the gradient through proteins. In these, ADP and inorganic phosphate are put together to generate ATP. The energy of the protons moving causes change in the proteins that opens its active site to assemble ADP and inorganic phosphate to form ATP. At the cytochrome oxidase complex, 2 electrons are transferred to an oxygen in the matrix to combine with 2 hydrogens to make H2O. Because oxygen is our final electron acceptor, it creates water to contain the electrochemical gradient that has been created. This gradient is created due to the pumping of hydrogen ions. Since there is a high concentration of hydrogen ions in the outer membrane space, these hydrogens want to move back into the matrix and can only do so through the ATP synthase complex. The potential energy created by this gradient is used by ATP synthase to synthesize ATP. The proton motive force is used to transfer hydrogens through ATP synthase. As 2 hydrogen enters ATP synthase, the structure spins and causes the ADP and inorganic phosphate together to form ATP. ADP and inorganic phosphate come together in a process called oxidative phosphorylation. Ultimately, the NADH creates 30 ATP and FADH squared creates 4 ATP.